let's begin with our science critic. He made a video, 45-minute video, criticizing the scientific method. And he's entitled to do that. The question is whether he can defend his posture. And today he talked about, in what we're going to be analyzing today, he talked about time and GPS and whether any of that confirms, first, whether it's been verified and confirmed, and second, whether that has anything to do with physics, aside from the fact that, he might argue that it confirms general relativity. And again, does that have anything to do with physics? So let's move on with our science critic. And this is what he said. These are the issues, okay? And let me set that up for you here. Here it goes. Listen carefully. The questions to be addressed in this rebuttal are, can it be said in physics that time flows? And does it make sense in physics to say that a mathematical concept such as time is dilated?
But the rest of those things all make sense to me, like time dilation, for example. It's a change in the flow of time, depending on how fast you're going, or if you're in a gravitational well or something like that. And the thing is, time dilation has been measured. It's why GPS needs to account for it.
Okay, so the issue is, first, whether time flows. Can we say in physics that time flows? And does it make any sense to say that time dilates in physics, right? We're talking about physics here. And then finally, just another issue is whether GPS confirms that time dilates, and meaning that general relativity is more or less correct, or perfectly correct, and whether that has anything to do with physics. So what I want to do is begin with Mr. Brian Greene, and he's going to help us make our case today. Okay, so this is what Brian Greene said in one of his documentaries. Hollywood movies, really. Okay, and here it is. This is the first one. And he saw time first under Newton's eyes and as a flowing river. And then he mentions that, when Einstein came around, he turned that into a frozen river. And that means that you could now, more or less, imagine yourself walking towards the future on this frozen river, okay, this frozen lake. Okay, then from there he moved on to this, which is the block universe. He treated time as a solid thing, meaning that we know the future, or the future has already happened, and essentially what you're doing is walking in the footsteps of what the programmer, the designer, the author designed for you. It's like a cartoon character. You cannot deviate from like Bugs Bunny. Bugs cannot work outside the script that was already done for him. And this is more or less what the relativists are saying. They're saying that your future's already been determined. All you're doing is walking on footsteps that are already there and that you cannot avoid. It's like the movie's already been done, and you're just a little cartoon character in that movie. That's their notion when they talk about the block universe. The question, a lot of people raise is, what does that do to free will? Means that we don't have free will because someone already designed our future and we're just going through the motions. That's more or less the notion we have here. Okay, and from there, they get to this thing where they turn time into not a frozen river, because again, they go back to the flow, and because they want to show you that gravity is a warpage of what space-time. Space-time form this grid, this canvas, this trampoline, and there are waves along this this medium. So they turn it into a medium, this time thingy. And they want to explain with that why or what would happen if the sun were to disappear. Well, they say, gravity would not disappear automatically because it would take time for the gravity waves along space-time to reach all the way to Earth. That's the distance in light seconds that we are from the sun. We're 8 light minutes away from the sun. Okay? So if the sun were to disappear, God waves his magic wand, makes the sun disappear, the Earth would not instantaneously fly away. It would take some time for those gravity waves to reach the Earth, and then the Earth would not have any gravitational influence, would gradually or maybe instantaneously drift away. And this is how they picture it. Imagine, they do want to illustrate it for you so that you can imagine it, so that you can visualize what they are saying. Okay, here it is. Okay, so if the sun disappears, the gravitational disturbance that results will form a wave that travels across, right? the spatial fabric. So they turn time into this fabric in much the same way that a pebble dropped into a pond makes ripples that travel across the surface of the water. There you see the Earth running away from the solar system simply because it has no gravitational influence, because the sun has disappeared. The sun is not weighing down, okay, the canvas anymore, and those waves take 8 minutes to reach us. Along what? Along space-time. In other words, what you have to understand from this is that they've turned time into a physical object. They're saying it's a medium of some kind, okay? That's essentially what they're saying. And the question is, does that make any sense in physics, to say that time is a physical object that flows and that can be dilated? Okay, so this is where we're having a problem, okay, with the physical interpretation. And so here is a rundown of those two notions. Is this time dilation what the definition says, which is the difference in the elapsed time as measured by 2 clocks? Or is it the physical interpretation, meaning why the Earth doesn't leave the solar system? Which of these notions is the real time dilation? And what they've done, they merged these two. When you ask them what is time dilation, or you say, why does the Earth fly out of the solar system? They use the one on the bottom. They say, well, the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system because time is warped. Okay, time is warped. And you say, well, that's irrational. And they bring all this time dilation stuff, all that thing, and you say, well, what do you mean by all that? Well, you're not supposed to take the analogy so literally. What we really mean is the difference in elapsed time as measured by 2 clocks. Well, these are two different notions of time dilation. One is used as a definition saying we take 2 measurements and they're different, and the other one says that, time prevents the Earth from flying out of the solar system. Okay, so we have these two notions, okay? And unless we can reconcile them somehow, all they're doing is covering all bases. They're saying time is both things, both a physical interpretation, because it's a physical object that prevents the Earth from flying out, and it's also, a measurement of some kind. And so it's like they're covering both bases. One of them is irrational, because it's to say that time is warped. And so they say, well, you're just taking the analogy too literally. No, the issue is that we need to explain why, what causes, what prevents, right, the Earth from flying out of the solar system. You have to explain that. And when they say time is warped is the explanation, well, that's not a physical interpretation, because time is not a physical entity. And so the notion that general relativity has out there is poppycock. It's nonsense. You can't sink your teeth into that. Now, if they want to use it as, a measurement of 2 measurements or whatever, comparison of measurements, that's irrelevant to physics, to science. We want to know why the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system. And they haven't answered that question. General relativity does not have a theory, an explanation. General relativity has a description, a mathematical description, and nothing but. Okay? And regarding GPS, well, here you have the notion of GPS, okay? And they'll tell you that GPS works, what? Because, they give you a cause, a mechanism, time dilates. Well, I don't know about that. And he says it has been measured and verified, okay? And so the question is, does GPS prove that time is a physical object? Does GPS prove that time can be warped, dilated, kicked around, etc.? I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a measurement? Or are we talking about the fact that, time can be manipulated physically? And they give you an analogy, or they use these other notions or arguments against you. They say your computer wouldn't work if quantum were wrong. Just like GPS would not work if general relativity were wrong. These are the types of issues that they raise against you. And so again, does the fact that your computer works prove that a particle can be at 2 places at once? That's the question, because that's the theory, that's the explanation they give you. And the same thing with GPS. They're saying, the reason GPS works is time dilates. Well, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that time is a physical object that can be bent, stretched, or whatever? Time dilates. They use a physical term to refer to time. And they say, well, you didn't understand what time dilates means. And they go back to the definition rather than to the physical interpretation they just finished giving you. And this is where we have a problem. Okay. So, we have a problem with this fellow's conclusion. He just takes it at face value, I guess on the basis of authority, and says, yeah, it's been proven that GPS works. The fact that GPS works, that's technology, has nothing to do with science. Science is about explaining, not about developing gadgets. And the fact that GPS works by trial and error, they figured out, in fact, they did a gravity probe 1 and A and gravity probe B, where they finally decided where they were going to put the satellites. They determined all that, by trial and error. They said, they took this thing and measured at different steps what the time dilation was, what the time difference was, and they got a value, and they say, okay, all we have to do is put it here, and we'll know how much difference there should be at that level. That's technology. It's got nothing to do with the explanation. You have to tell me why, what caused each clock to travel or to tick at the rate that it does. These atomic clocks, what makes them tick at this speed up there and down here at a different speed? What came in contact with the inside of the clock? That's what you got to explain. But to say that it does, that's just a description. You haven't explained anything. So you still don't understand why, what causes that to happen. All you know is that it does. And it does not count as science. It's the cause that, identifying the cause, the mechanism, is what is identified as science, as physics. Okay, all these people are doing is stamp collecting. And someone asked me along the same lines, okay, about an interview I had a little over a week ago. It says, you mentioned an interview last episode. Care to link it? Are we going to hear about that one day? Well, I don't think you'll ever hear about it because I haven't heard about it. Okay, it's just as simple as that. What happened was this fellow interviewed me, and he thought I essentially was going to come and confirm his version of science. Okay, that's essentially what it amounted to. And, when you interview someone, you believe, you think that they're going to listen to the guy that's going to propose his version of how he sees the world. That's not exactly what happened here. We started out more or less like that, but that's not how it ended. In fact, it ended quite terribly. And that's why he did not upload the video. That's why I don't have a copy of it. He didn't even talk to me anymore. I think he was upset. Okay. And here's a rundown so that you know what happened on that day. That's all I can give you because there is no video, okay, that I can point to or anything like that. Okay. Essentially, he was trying to indoctrinate me instead of interview me. Okay. He thought I thought like him. And so he was just kind of reinforce what he already believed, which also happened in other interviews with me. Okay, people think that I think like they do, and they find out that I don't. And so I told them up front what science was to me, that I was proposing a new version of science, new version of the scientific method that did away with everything we've done in the last 3,000 years, Greeks included. Okay, all of it is washed aside. I dump all that in the trash can. We've never done science on planet Earth. Okay, that's what this site says. You don't have to agree with me. We're not asking you to agree. We want you to listen, to understand, and reach your own conclusions. Okay? So I told them I had a new version of science. My version of science was rational explanations. Now, in that definition there, do you see any provision for math? And do you see any provisions for experiments? Now, he had no problem with the math part for whatever reason. He never really went into we never went into that in any depth. So he said, okay, he kind of liked that. But when we went into experiments, we got into a lot of trouble. There was a lot of crying, We got into a little bit of interruptions and exchange of words and so on. Not that we went off the rails, but we didn't see eye to eye, obviously. And so what was the issue with experiments? Again, in a nutshell, we also discussed the issue of knowledge that we're going to be dealing with today. And what was the issue with experiments? Well, I said, what experiment can you run? And this goes also for the flat earthers who insist on experiments. Electric universers also insist on experiments. More than the establishment. Actually, the establishment likes to do a lot of so-called theoretical physics. They do a lot of thought experiments, and a lot of these fringe groups, they don't like that. They say, no, we want an experiment to prove, to verify, to demonstrate, etc., etc. And I said, experiments have nothing to do with a scientific method or with science. And it blew his mind. He said, what do you mean? We need to verify. We need to prove. We need to know. That's how we got into the word knowledge. And I said, okay, what experiments do you propose to detect for invisible, intangible entities? What is an experiment? An experiment is see, touch. That's what an experiment is. See, touch. You go to the lab to see and to touch. But now we have all these invisible, intangible entities you cannot see, you cannot touch. What experiment does any of these fringe groups, right? Flat earthers, electric universers, even the establishment, what do they propose to detect that which you cannot see and that which you cannot touch? And that's where it comes down to a little bit of what we're going to be dealing with today, the fact that all these people say that an object is that which you can see, touch, and that which exists is that which you can see, touch. And we're saying none of that, all those definitions, those notions are irrational. An object is not that which you can see or touch. Existence is not that which you can see or touch, and that's where we run into trouble. And so I said, well, what experiment do you propose to detect something which you cannot see or touch? also, by the way, ratified by the establishment at CERN and SLAC and Fermilab and all these accelerators. They say we can't see or touch what's in there. And so they go into concepts. It was mass, it was charge, it was energy. So they get into all they mediate all these transactions with abstract mathematical concepts. And people don't realize that. Basically, laymen, they think they're talking about things. They think that energy is a thing, mass is a thing, force is a thing. So when these people say, well, the particle of electromagnetism, the photon or whatever, and they say, okay, I understand, it's a little ball. That's what they're thinking of. And they don't realize that ball really represents a number. What they're doing is accelerating a number, and people don't catch that. Okay, so I said, so the establishment also is in accordance that there are invisible, intangible entities, or at least that there's something invisible or intangible in that region that they cannot account for, and they just go into concepts. That's what's happening. And so I'm saying, what if you have to detect one of these invisible, intangible entities? What experiment are you going to run? And he did not understand that at all, I guess, again, because he thinks a thing is that which you can see or touch. Existence is that which you can see or touch. They are synonyms, existence and objects and things. And so he had no answer, and at the same time, he kind of brushed it aside because it didn't click in his brain. He didn't know what I was saying. And so I continued with that line of reasoning. I said, how do you define science in such a way as to include, right, those phenomena we cannot see or touch? And because I said you can define science any way you want, but now if you're going to say that gravity and say magnetism, electricity, the workings of the atom, if those are part of physics, and physics is part of science, how do you define science in order to incorporate those phenomena? And he had no answer to that. He just went with what we have, and he just kept going back to knowledge, to truth, to verification, to experiments, and I couldn't get him out of that, and he just tried to impose that idea on me. He wasn't really interviewing me at that point. It was just kind of like a shouting match, more or less. We didn't get into shouting, but it's like we interrupted each other constantly, and he finally called it quits and never put the video up. So yeah, you won't find anything out there. I don't have a copy of it. He hasn't called me back. I think he was upset at me that I ruined his show. So that's all I can tell you. There's nothing there, okay? Later on, I went up there and found out some of his definitions. Went to his site. I hadn't gone to his site previously, but then I went to his site and found these definitions. And I realized then why we didn't see eye to eye, especially on the issue of knowledge that we're going to be dealing with today. I told him knowledge was belief, belief was knowledge, and lots of people have problems with that out there because they've been drilled in high school and college that knowledge is something different than belief, but they don't really know exactly what it is, but they say knowledge is different. And today we're going to be dealing with that, but you can see his definitions there, and they're not very good. In the case of belief, it's to accept something as true, where true is, again, a belief. And what is knowledge? Awareness of some fact, where fact is also an opinion, a belief. And so these are two words or synonyms, and people don't like me saying that. Okay. Then obviously he said reality is that which exists, and the universe is all that exists. That's like saying God is everything. And again, those definitions are worthless. You can't use those in science. Again, fact and myth. You can see there again what someone says proven in the case of fact, and myth is what is a false belief. And they're all the same thing, because the way they really look at this is that, what I know, I know. What you know is a belief. That's the way they look at it. Every person looks at everybody else in the universe, or at least here on planet Earth, and says, I know what I know, but what you believe, what you think you know. That's the way everybody looks at this. And you find out that he was a follower of Ayn Rand, and that also explains a lot, because Ayn Rand was not a philosopher. She had no clue about anything. Okay, I'm going to talk about her today. I'm going to try to destroy her in every possible way I can. Basically, those people who say or think that I'm saying the same thing that Ayn Rand said. And if they say that, it's because they don't understand what this site is about and what I've been saying all these years. Okay, no, I say absolutely nothing even similar to Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand said everything that every so-called philosopher, traditional philosophers, said before she did. She didn't change anything whatsoever, nothing. And I'm saying something different than all of them. And until you understand that difference, well, then you're going to say the same thing. You're going to say, dude, you're saying the same thing as Ayn Rand. No, and so the first thing I want to mention here is that what I said the other day, that you got to get rid of all your heroes, I had to get rid of heroes, and if you look at the previous lecture, I talked about that. You got to get rid of some of these heroes. They're not heroes, okay? And I had to get rid of one hero, and that was Carl Sagan. He was an atheist, and I was an atheist at the time. He believed in that we would go to the stars, and I more or less agreed with him. That I thought that we were going to colonize first the planets and move out of the solar system, conquer one star, maybe one star system, a planet somewhere, and from there move on to other stars, eventually conquer the galaxies, and eventually conquer the universe. That's the train of thought. And so I pondered the issue of whether anyone had already come to Earth. You had von Däniken and his ideas that the pyramids were built by extraterrestrials and so on at the time, and so I was involved in that. I didn't believe in any of that, but that subject was very popular at the time. It's less popular, I think, today. And with Carl Sagan on the one side talking about going out there, then you give the possibility that maybe the ETs have already come down here or can come down here. So you at least concede the possibility. And then you run into Fermi's paradox, which all of those of you who heard about it, is that why haven't we seen any extraterrestrials here? If you should imagine that there are some civilizations that are much more advanced than we are, so why aren't the Klingons here? That's the issue, And so I had to delete Carl Sagan as a hero of mine because of two reasons. But then Carl Sagan was not even a physicist. He believed in quantum mechanics and general relativity. I don't know if he was into string theory. I never researched that in his case because I canned him a long time ago. Carl Sagan was not a physicist. He was a religious fanatic, in other words, an atheist. And these people are more fanatic than religious folk. And he also believed we were going to the stars. And likewise, I can only urge you to abandon Ayn Rand. She was not a philosopher. She tried to do physics. She failed at that miserably. She didn't do physics at all. And she was also a religious fanatic. She was an atheist. Okay, and all she did was politics. All she did is recommend how people should behave and live. Okay, so that's my take on good old Ayn, as some people call her, and Carl Sagan. So, and Ayn Rand was never a hero of mine, but I got rid of both of them. I don't think they were physicists. They weren't philosophers. They were just. In the case of Ayn Rand, she was just a politician.